something important just happened, but most of the world barely noticed. The United States extended the African Growth and Opportunities Act, AGOA, only until December 2026 instead of the usual 10-year renewal. A short extension, a cautious extension, a strategic extension, because Africa is changing. When AGOA was launched in 2000, its purpose seemed straightforward. The United States would allow duty-free access to thousands of African exports, textiles, garments, agricultural products, and some manufactured goods. In return, African nations were expected to move toward market-based economies, maintain political stability, protect intellectual property, align with certain US geopolitical interests. On paper, it was a trade agreement. In reality, it was also a strategic instrument. The strings attached were subtle but real. Countries could be removed from AGOA eligibility for policies not aligned with Washington's interests. And the world is scrambling once again for Africa's resources. But this scramble did not begin today. It began centuries ago. God gave this planet's resources equitably to all humanity. Yet, it's a few humans driven by greed and power who turned those blessings into instruments of domination, suffering, and control. This is not just a story about trade. This is the story of Africa, its pain, its resilience, and its rising power. Long before oil, gold, or lithium became strategic assets, Africa's most profitable export was human beings. During the transatlantic slave trade, 13 million Africans were captured, sold, and transported to the Americas between 1501 and 1867. For European empires and plantation owners, exporting slaves became more profitable than exporting minerals. Human labor built American plantations, European wealth, global trade empires. Africa lost generations of its strongest youth. Its societies were destabilized. Its development was delayed by centuries. Then came the next phase. By the late 19th century, European powers gathered at the Berlin Conference and divided Africa like a cake. As a result, almost the entire continent of Africa was colonized and under the rule of European powers, leading to the deaths of many and the exploitation of traditional owners of the land. In addition, the European powers created official policies that allowed them to use all of Africa's resources without benefit or negotiations with the African inhabitants. Borders were drawn with rulers, communities were split, resources were mapped not for Africans but for foreign empires. Gold, diamonds, rubber, cocoa, oil, everything flowed outward. Colonial infrastructure, railways and ports were built not to connect Africans to each other, but to transport resources to European ships. Africa exported raw materials cheaply. It imported finished goods at high prices. This system ensured one thing: Africa could never become rich from its own resources. Dependency was designed into the system. Even when independence movement began, control did not easily fade. In southern Africa, white minority regimes ruled for decades. Apartheid was a brutal system of institutionalized racial segregation and white minority rule in South Africa from 1948 to the early 1990s, designed to ensure political, economic, and social supremacy for the white minority. The National Party implemented policies enforcing rigid separation, such as land disposition, pass laws, and homelands, stripping black South Africans of citizenship and human rights. It was dismantled in the early 1990s through internal protest, international pressure, and negotiation led by Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk. Black Africans were denied land, education, and economic participation. Across the continent, people endured poverty despite resource wealth, hunger in fertile lands, political repression, economic exclusion. African resources enriched the world, but Africans themselves remained poor. The world boycotted apartheid eventually. Sanctions and resistance ended white minority rule, but economic control still lingered. From the 1950s to the 1970s, African nations gained political independence. Flags changed, anthems changed, but economic structures remained. Colonial powers retained control over African resources after independence through neo-colonialism, a system of indirect economic, financial, and military control designed to keep former colonies as suppliers of raw materials. Key mechanisms included retaining ownership of mining operations, enforcing inequitable currency system, maintaining military intervention rights, and saddling new nations with debt. Foreign companies retained control over mining, oil production, banking, trade routes. Africa still exported raw materials cheaply. It still imported finished goods at high cost. Control had shifted from colonial governments to multilateral corporations. Africa was politically free but economically dependent. Why has the world always competed for Africa? Because Africa holds what the world needs to survive. The future of global industry depends on African resources. Africa holds vast cobalt reserves, lithium, rare earth elements, platinum and manganese, 30% of global mineral reserves, vast oil and gas fields, gold and diamonds, the youngest population on earth. From the Industrial Revolution to the digital age, global growth has depended on African resources. Without Africa, modern industry struggles to survive. Today, electric vehicles, semiconductors, batteries, smartphones, and defense systems depend on minerals buried beneath the African soil. Whoever controls these resources controls the future. In the early 2000s, China entered Africa aggressively. While Western nations focused on governance conditions and human rights requirements, China offered what Africa needed most: roads, railways, ports, power plants. Projects were fast, funding was large, conditions seemed minimal. Africa gained infrastructure rapidly. But loans accumulated. Some nations now face heavy repayment burdens, resource contracts tied to debt, strategic assets linked to financing. Critics call it debt trap diplomacy. Supporters call it development partnership. Either way, China secured long-term resource access. Africa gained infrastructure, but also new dependencies. While China built infrastructure and the West pushed trade frameworks, another player moved quietly: India. Something is happening most of the world hasn't noticed. Indian Institute of Technology Madras established its first international campus in Zanzibar, Tanzania in November 2023, offering programs in data science and artificial intelligence. This campus provides high-quality technical education in Africa, with a significant percentage of students being women. A second campus is planned for Nigeria by 2026. Right now, over 25,000 African students are studying in Indian universities. African presidents visit New Delhi more frequently than some Western capitals. Trade between India and Africa has crossed $100 billion. Indian companies operate across more than 40 African nations. African tech startups increasingly seek Indian investors. This is not temporary. This is a shift in global power. The story began decades ago. India gained independence in 1947. African nations followed in the 1950s and 60s. Both shared the wounds of colonization. Both understood poverty and rebuilding. India opened its universities to African students. Thousands studied medicine, engineering, agriculture. They returned home not just with degrees, but with trust and relationship. Then the Cold War shifted global attention. For years, the relationship remained quiet until recently. For decades, Africans died from treatable diseases because Western medicines were too expensive. HIV treatment once cost $10,000 per year. Most Africans earned less than $2 per day. Then Indian pharmaceutical companies produced generic medicines. Cost dropped to around $150. Millions of lives were saved. Today, about 80% of HIV medication in Africa comes from Indian manufacturers. Africans remember who stood with them in crisis. This created trust that money cannot buy: education and dignity. Western education is prestigious but expensive. $50,000 per year in some universities. Many African families cannot afford it. Indian universities offer quality education at a fraction of the cost. But the real difference is dignity. African students often say, "In India, we are not treated as outsiders, we are treated as equals." Over 50,000 African graduates from India now serve as doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, government officials. They form a powerful bridge between continents. When many Western companies invest in Africa, they bring their own workers, extract resources, send profits home. African benefits remains limited. Indian companies often take a different approach. They build factories locally, train African engineers, create supply chains within Africa. Technology is transferred, skills are shared. Africans are not just workers, they become partners. Indian tech firms are helping African engineers build local solutions. Apps for mobile banking, agriculture, health monitoring, education. These technologies are designed for African conditions. Low bandwidth, low cost, high impact. African startups are rising rapidly. Many are built by engineers trained through Indian partnerships. Africa is moving from consumer to creator. Through centuries of exploitation, Africa endured slavery, colonization, apartheid, poverty, hunger, political instability. Yet its people remained resilient. Today, young populations drive innovation, regional trade is increasing, education levels are rising, technology adoption is rapid. Africa is not the continent of despair many once imagined. It is becoming a continent of opportunity. Africa is no longer dependent on one partner. It trades with the United States, China, India, Europe, the Middle East, itself through the African Continental Free Trade Area. This diversification gives leverage. No single power can dominate as before. AGOA is becoming less central because Africa has alternatives. The world is once again scrambling for African resources, but this time Africa is negotiating. It demands technology transfers, local jobs, value addition, infrastructure, education. Africa is no longer just a supplier of raw materials. It wants to process, manufacture, and innovate. For centuries, Africa was controlled, then influenced, then competed over. Now it is choosing partners, choosing policies, choosing its future. From slavery to sovereignty, from colonization to collaboration, from dependency to diversification, the face of Africa is changing. The question is no longer who will control Africa. The question is who will partner Africa on equal terms, because the future of global industry, energy and technology runs through African soil. And for the first time in modern history, Africa is in a position to decide how that future will be shaped. The changing phase of Africa has begun.